very much for the introduction. Thank you also for the invitation, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. So my title, I just wanted to explain a few things about where some of this material is coming from. I've become very, very interested in the last, I guess, 15 years in how schools make a contribution to the personal and social aspects of education. And I believe that our education system has become rather fragmented and mechanized, and if anything is showing us that we need these aspects, today is it. So I'm going to talk about these following things, really. I'm going to talk about that, in my view, education is not something that's passed on, it's direct experience, that schools are highly formative in terms of personal social aspects of society and development. And that if we look at what experience matters in a school, everything matters. And we know now a lot more about the key factors from research studies, and I'll explore the implications. So I'm not the first person to think that lived experience at school matters. Some people much more famous than me actually said this before me. John Dewey, 1938. Education is a social process. Education is growth. Education is not preparation for life, but is life itself. That, for me, that last bit is a very important part that I will come back to. We're not preparing young people for something else. We are giving them a life in school which will affect the life they have afterwards. So it's not that school is preparation, school is life. And Tolstoy, the only purpose of education is freedom. The only method is experience. And I want to now, in a sense, put a lot of flesh on the bones of this argument. So in my view, the school's role is to have a deliberate, intentional process to provide support, relationships, experience, opportunities that promote positive outcomes for young people. And that is a wide brief, a much wider brief in many ways than we have taken in the last years in education in my country. So here we are, we're talking about emotional resilience, we're talking about peace education. So therefore there are certain aspects of school experience that we know are particularly important. We know that bullying is the top issue for young people in school. It's the top concern. This has in many ways become even stronger with the capacity to engage digitally in the same processes and anonymously. So bullying and conflict resolution is part of the lived experience of school, and it matters how we conduct that, because young people are learning something. But I think, and I'm going to explain this further later, it's really, really important what we learn about ourselves at school. I still talk to people now at my great age who say to me, I'm no good at this, I can't do that. And I say, well, wow, where did you learn that? And they say, I learned it at school. So these messages that we pick up from school about what capacity, what agency, what capability we have are all really long lasting. And I'm going to expand on that later. We also know from research that bullying, schools have a real power to change methods of conflict resolution and the development of empathy. And we know that methods like the shared concern method are methods that work most effectively. So we keep coming around that it's the process, it's the lived experience. We keep coming back to this key idea. So what else do we know about schools? we know that schools make a significant difference. One of the pieces of research I keep going back to is a piece of research by Michael Rutter, who showed that if a young person leaves school with two things, some academic skills, the capacity to read and write particularly, as well as a sense of being an agent, an effective person in their world, if young people leave school with that, they are 10 times more likely to be a good citizen, a good partner, a good parent, and work if those opportunities exist. So there's no doubt that school matters. We also know, and I'm going to show you later some more data on this, that there is a reciprocal relationship between well-being, good mental health, academic attainment, life satisfaction, and subjective well-being come from these school experiences, and they feed into how we operate interpersonally when we leave. So what I'm arguing very strongly is that schools must have both cognitive and social goals. They cannot just have the reductionist cognitive goals that we now measure ourselves globally by. And these micro processes that are happening in school, if we look at the time we live in now, have huge impact at the macro level. I live in a culture where the following three things are really on the agenda. Given a time of change and uncertainty, fear and fear of strangers is one of the driving forces of very negative processes in our society. And these come from earlier social experience and our learning. Can I handle uncertainty? Can I handle ambiguity? Do I have to blame other people? Perseverance is a key quality we know in many things, and the development of altruism and empathy is crucial. So I'm going to show you, I hope, how these are learned through education. So what has research shown us are the key factors that make a difference? What is it that in education we can do? And in schools, I know schools aren't the only location of education, but what can we do that make a difference? Well, I've already mentioned Michael Rutter, and I won't go, but if you have time and you're interested, I really would read his work. The work of Carol Dweck I find particularly interesting, because Carol Dweck started off studying helplessness, started off studying things like learned helplessness, and became very interested in how schools and the experience at schools impact on our mindset and how our position in the world. Whether we become problem solvers, whether we become active participants. And I think these are all crucial aspects of emotional development, which are crucial aspects in terms of how we relate to others. In other words, peace and conflict resolution. I've put some others up there. One is a book that I wrote with some colleagues a while back, if you want to take a further look at it. Okay, so one of the concepts I use to try to bring this together is the concept of school connectedness. It's something that's worked on in many countries. What is it that we mean by school connectedness? And what I'm trying to argue is experience matters, and these experiences are deeply connected. The academic aspects of education, the personal social aspects of education, the citizen aspects of education, these are all connected. But what do we mean? What does the research tell us are the key factors in terms of how young people learn about these things at school? Well, at the top left, you'll see that that's the number one factor. It comes out all the time. relationships are key. Relationships with peers, relationships with teachers and other adults in school are the driving force of many of these other aspects I'm focusing on here. Whether young people feel they belong, whether they feel a member of the learning community of the school, their sense of acceptance, respect, support, and caring. These sound like very obvious things, but if I go back to the quote I gave you about what schools are supposed to be doing, what I don't see, I see it in some schools, but what I don't see is the intentional, deliberative promotion of this in school. What I see is the intentional, deliberative planning of the school curriculum, but not the personal social aspects of school that are so powerful in shaping how people feel about themselves and in shaping how they feel about others and see others. Satisfaction with school matters. And if we're talking about engagement and membership, the fact that this is a UK figure, it's gone up a little bit, but not a lot. 50% of our young people don't enjoy school. They don't feel it's a place where they're living, to go back to my original argument about experience. Participation and voice are key in these processes. When young people feel listened to, when they have real participation, we know that they feel connected, engaged, and more able to have good relationships. So I'm arguing that this is the important map in terms of what we're talking about today. First of all, relationships and belongingness, and that these should be intentionally developed in education. If you feel connected, you are less likely to feel antagonism, anger, and so on, or blame other people. So relationships and belongingness are key. In the top right-hand corner, I put a sense of self-efficacy and engagement. I think this is really, I'm going to show you some data later, really crucial. Do I feel, I'm not talking about self-esteem. This is a very important distinction. Self-efficacy is basically, how effective do I see myself? Am I somebody who, in the learning experiences I have, I've learned that I can do something about it. I have a growth mindset. I can tackle this problem. This growth mindset, we're beginning to realize, is absolutely central to academic learning, social activity, social action, and so on. We learn that through learning. I'm going to give you a quick example. Carol Dweck did an observation of a maths lesson, and all the children in the class were doing the same sum, and they came up to the teacher for some feedback and marking of the task. This is olden days. And so the boy goes up, and the teacher says to him, "Jack, you know, you can do better than this. You haven't tried here. I've seen you do better than this. Go away and redo them." Message to Jack: you can do this. You're just not putting in enough effort. Persevere. Jane goes up. "Oh, Jane, I'm sorry you've got all these wrongs, but don't worry. Next week, we're moving on to algebra." Message to Jane: you could never do this if you wanted to. You're not good at it. It's an ability feedback. You don't have the ability. So what messages are we sending young people about themselves in terms of how they deal with conflict? Whether they see themselves as effective and able to learn, or whether they just see themselves as shaped, fixed. The middle is that all of this is about connectedness, engagement, and participation. If I go back to we learn this through lived experience, then The issue is, how in my school am I learning these things? And I'm arguing that we have to develop, build connectedness, engagement, participation consciously if we really are going to tackle these issues. I've already mentioned that in terms of the area we're exploring today, bullying and peer conflict is really important. I'm going to show you graphs in a minute that show you that for young people, that is the number one factor that decreases life satisfaction. And we know that this is a prelude. This is really important in peace education. What are we actually teaching young people about conflict resolution? So why do these, I said earlier that relationships were number one. Why does that matter?
5 more minutes.
Thank you. It's because relationships with teachers are the central dimension, the most important dimension of attachment to school, So there's some very good research from a guy called Smith who showed that if a student who's at risk socially has a relationship with just one teacher, one adult, they are less likely to have social problems, to engage in social, antisocial behavior. 2/3 of 11 to 12-year-olds reported good or adequate relationships with teachers. That means 30% didn't. That's an awful lot of kids who are not having good experiences in terms of their relationships. It's where they're learning trust within these relationships. I found this next one really, really interesting because it's not the level of support that actually in reality matters how young people feel. It's whether they perceive themselves to be supportive. So it matters what children feel. It matters whether they feel supported, whether they feel things are fair, and whether they think the school and the adults are handling conflict well. So poor relations with teachers create problems. And there is a huge link between teacher-student relationships, school belonging, motivation, and well-being. So I'm arguing we learn everywhere in school about these important matters through the everyday practices of the school, the feedback from the teacher, the comments from the kids in the classroom, and whether they're intervened with or not. We are learning all the time about ourselves, about our identity, about mental social health. So therefore the territory is all of those things listed there. It's not just one program, it's the whole lived experience of the school. And first, obviously, we have to find out what that is. So it's about classroom processes, feedback, learning and teaching processes in the classroom, school climate, and relationships across the piece. So I took this slide from a PISA presentation, which is not quite where I expected to see it, I have to say. But this is a very interesting slide. At the top right-hand quadrant, you've got the relationship, the countries in the world that are best at reading, okay? And along the bottom, you've got whether students hold a growth mindset or not. Now, what this slide is very interestingly showing us is that we can hit both aspects together. We can create a growth mindset, and it will impact on those academic skills that young people need to feel that they can survive and cope and be successful. So, to finish, I'm saying that I'm putting forward two key ideas to you. That if we are going to help young people feel good about themselves, and when young people feel good about themselves and feel equipped to cope with the world in which they live in, socially, personally, and academically, you are likely to get a reduction in conflict, at an individual level, at a regional level, at a national, international level. And what research has taught us that schools can contribute to this. Centrally important is personal relationships. And there's a lot of work to be done on that yet. Second key idea is that the relationship between, there is a huge relationship between the different aspects of school policy and practice. And there has to be congruence and alignment between those elements. And those elements are not just about the academic curriculum, that we have to widen our curriculum, we have to widen our view of what schools are actually doing. So there you go. I look forward to talking further about that or answering any questions later on.
Colleen.